Welcome to the latest episode of Gryphon Manor. Now, in the last episode, I returned to the estate and continued my own personal industrial revolution by setting up my manual and automated smelting stations, which now allows me to smelt resources on an industrial scale, and that will dramatically speed up some of my planned projects and make some others feasible in the first place. It also dramatically increases the risk of burning myself to a crisp within the otherwise safe and comfortable confines of my base, but that's my burden to bear. After all, there are no OSHA regulations in Minecraft. In this episode, it's time to spread the love to the surrounding countryside and enable the first steps toward building a useful transportation infrastructure. It's all about terraforming. Though I guess it's not really terraforming, as I'm not changing a non-Earth planet into an Earth-like planet. Okay, fair enough. Let's call it landscaping then. As I've stated all along, the goal here is to build a living and breathing world, and while that obviously means building structures and communities, it also means sculpting the world to better fit the backdrop and context of those structures and communities. After all, the game has generated a world with a surface area almost equal to that of the planet Neptune, which is very impressive, but the nitty-gritty details of the landscape are a bit less so. Or at least they don't fit into the plan rattling around in my head, so a bit of work is in order to get it there. In this particular seed, the estate sits on top of what I've been calling a river to nowhere, and I've spent a lot of time and effort going back and forth trying to decide what to do with that. I eventually decided that it had to go, and I've been taking some time out here and there to start that process, but without a focused effort, it's been slow going, and so it's time to speed things up. So let me outline what the goals are for this episode. Up to this point, I've been removing the river to nowhere through displacement, and that means I've been collecting the various sand and gravel blocks I found lying around, and then I drop them into the riverside of a sand or gravel wall, and as the wall grows and moves forward, I remove the sand and gravel from the back of the wall and drop it again on the water side to continue the process. Since the river has a lot of sand and gravel already in it, the amount of material I've been working with has been steadily growing, and that stuff will come in mighty useful in the near future. But for right now, the process is pretty time consuming and definitely tedious. It's a lot like most math classes. I hope to reduce the time and tedium a bit by trying a trick I accidentally learned a while ago. Back when I was building the cisterns to feed the steam engines in the workshop, I discovered that you could use a steam engine and a hose pulley to rapidly drain a large body of water up to 10,000 blocks in size. So I will want to explore that strategy and see if I can use it to drain my river to nowhere. Once the river to nowhere is drained, I'll be left with a canyon to nowhere, and that's only marginally better. I thought a bit about leaving that in place, but I ditched that idea and dug up a new one. Now, filling the space gave me a natural roadbed on which to build it, and it would help soften the topography of the area. So that's now the official plan, subject to change without notice, because that is, of course, just how Minecraft works. Aside from filling in the drained river, there are plenty of holes, caves, and chasms in the area, and they need to be filled in or at least covered over, and some of the higher elevations will need to be smoothed out to achieve a kinder and gentler rolling landscape. There are some nice forests in the immediate area, but they're not quite the forests I envisioned for this part of Gryphonshire, so I will grab my best flannel plaid shirt and a beefy axe and clear the trees and vegetation so that I can replace all of that and more with the desired trees and flora. As a part of all the other tasks, I will also be working to build the first stretches of a formal road network. I will definitely connect the estate and Andover, but I will probably work on some of the other bits in anticipation of future growth while I work on the local landscaping. After all, it all ties in together, so I might as well work on them holistically. Historically, I found the displacement method to be the most efficient and effective way to drain a body of water in Minecraft. I have tried using sponges, but for large bodies of water, it can be a frustrating exercise because the remaining water source blocks can regenerate the water source blocks I just absorbed with the sponge, which often leaves me right back to where I started, except all my dry sponges are now soaking wet. The whole process can be a bit draining. Of course, the trick there is to use displacement to break a body of water into smaller sections or cells, and then use the sponges in the smaller and more enclosed bodies of water, which will prevent the water blocks from regenerating, usually. But finding sponges, or at least finding enough sponges, and managing the drying and reuse of those sponges is a pain in the butt and generally not worth the effort unless we're talking about a pretty sizable body of water. So I normally don't bother with them. However, the River to Nowhere is a sizable body of water, so I would probably be inclined to find some sponges anyway. However, when I was building those cisterns, I discovered the hard way that they were not quite big enough. And so when I powered the first steam engine that drew water out of the cistern, I found that it started draining the cistern. And in fact, it was draining it at a pretty good clip. Now, based on that experience, I think that would be just the ticket for draining the River to Nowhere. So I will need to build a steam engine to power the hose pulley and pump the water. But I don't need anything fancy, just a small engine with a 3x3 boiler using passive heat, and that will probably be enough. So that's what I'm building here. And this will only work if the body of water is less than 10,000 blocks in volume. Therefore, I need to break up the river into segments, each of which needs to be under the 10,000 block limit in order to enable the draining process, but that seems pretty straightforward. And with the pump up and running, it's draining. Sort of. I've already tried this several times over, and the result's always the same. The hose pulley does seem to drain, but only a single block of water. And this is definitely not what I had encountered before, not by a long shot. At first, I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, it takes a really long time to drain, but that was not my experience with the cistern. And since there has not been an update to the Create mod since I built the cisterns, this can't be a case of the mod behavior changing out from underneath me. I even increased the speed of the pump in an attempt to draw out more water over the same period of time, but that didn't seem to make a difference. I finally got things draining properly. The trick was to do something with all that water. Either I needed a place to pump it into, such as emptying one space of less than 10,000 blocks to fill another space of less than 10,000 blocks, which is not what I want, or to use it up. So I quit trying to pump the water to some random place, and instead I started pumping the water into the steam engine as fast as I could, and that actually did the trick. The steam engine was drinking up the water as fast as I could pump it in, so now the draining is moving along quite nicely. Initially, I would drain a section and then section off another bit of the river and move the pump over and then drain that. Now, I have since realized that if I build the sections ahead of time and place the pump between two filled sections, I could drain one section and then just move the hose pulley to the adjacent section without moving the rest of the steam engine, which has sped things up dramatically. One could even say that I'm picking up some steam here, so to speak. The trick with the hose pulley at this point is in the placement. It will drain the water down to the level of the end of the hose, and therefore I want to place the pulley over the deepest bits of the water. Placing the pulley over more shallow water will hose the whole effort, and I'll need to manually deal with the leftovers. And voila! The flood is cleared, and that would have been the hardest part of this whole exercise, but with a bit of help from the Create mod, it all went by surprisingly quickly. Since the Create mod made such short work of the River to Nowhere, this bit is now the biggest and perhaps most difficult task ahead of me, and I don't think any of my mods can help me with this bit. The biggest task is to clear out the sand and gravel from the dry riverbed, because sand and gravel is far too valuable and useful to just bury where it is. And then I will fill in the riverbed to the same level as surrounding land, and I have about 17,000 dirt blocks in storage, but something tells me that I won't even put a dent in this. Or to be more accurate, to take the dent out. So I will need to dip into my cobblestone stores for most of the fill, and with over 270,000 cobblestone blocks, I'm pretty sure that will get me to where I need to be. I'll save the dirt for the top layer so that I can actually plant stuff. As a general rule, I don't use cobblestone as filler. If I encounter cobblestone, I want it to be there because I deliberately put it there, or a game mechanic formed it there. Therefore, if I don't remember putting it there, then finding cobblestone will almost always lead to something interesting. Well, I like to think I make stuff that is interesting, so let me rephrase that. Finding cobblestone will almost always lead to something new and interesting. Therefore, I will need to smelt the cobblestone into stone and use that as the filler. Luckily, I now have all sorts of heavy-duty smelting options, so that's an amazing coincidence. With the dry riverbed filled in, I can continue with shaving down the low elevations immediately around the estate. Now, I had already started on them here and there between episodes, but now I need to take it up a notch. Eventually, I want the estate to sit at the bottom of a shallow depression. No, that is depression the emotion. I'm talking about a low point in the landscape. Then, when I finally replace the current cottage at the surface with an actual manor house, it will rise up from the bottom of the depression in a fairly dramatic type of way, and I think this will help the end result to be more interesting to look at. Another thing that I'm doing during this phase of the operation is to seal up the various cracks and caves in the immediate area. Now, at some point, I will venture into those caves and seek the mysteries they contain, but when that happens, I want it to be because I'm ready and prepared for the adventure, not because I accidentally ran into a deep crevice with my horse and fell into the bottom of it. I love trees, both in and out of Minecraft. However, I don't love all trees equally. And in the case of this particular Minecraft world, I have some specific ideas about how I want to set up the environment around the estate. And that would include an oak and dark oak forest, which is slightly different from the dark forest biome in that the trees will be packed slightly less densely and there will be no giant mushrooms. Of course, that kind of forest reminds me more of the Black Forest of Germany than something like, say, Sherwood Forest. But that's okay for now. There will be a time for kinder and gentler forests in Gryphonshire, but that's for later. That means that I will need to cut down the existing dark forest as well as the birch forest and the mystic grove. To the west and southwest of the estate is a large hill, and on the west side of that hill and beyond is a redwood forest. Now, one doesn't typically see a redwood tree, much less a whole forest of them, in rural England. However, I love redwood trees, both in real life and in Minecraft, so I'm going to play the artistic license card and keep the redwoods. However, as you can see here, there's not much of a fade between the redwood biome and the rest of the area. So I want to soften and blur that transition somewhat, but I'm not quite sure I want to tackle that particular problem right now. Speaking of that hill, as I was cutting down the old growth birch trees on the eastern side of that hill, I found a large cave mouth that opened into a massive and extremely deep cavern complex that's just crying out for a little exploration. And it's triggering my fear of heights big time. Just a side note, normally it's kind of hard to trigger my phobia with a computer game and a plain old monitor, but it turns out that it was incredibly easy to do while playing Minecraft in VR, so that's why I returned to a regular monitor. But if you don't have a problem with heights, I strongly recommend you try Minecraft in VR if you ever get the chance. It's simply amazing. Anyway, I will mostly seal this off for now, but I will definitely want to come back and explore all this and see what I can do with it. Maybe I will set up an entrance to an ancient hidden dungeon or something like that. The possibilities are endless. The only thing I need is time. With the basic terraforming out of the way, I want to set up the first bits of proper arterial roadway in this world. Now, a roadway is not absolutely necessary for gameplay, even in a survival world, but it does help, especially if one uses particularly fast vehicles like horses or motor cars. Now, this is because those vehicles move fast enough that you might not have the time to react and avoid falling down any deep dark holes you run across. Literally. However, by their very nature, a road implies that as long as you're on the road, there's no holes to worry about, and so it should be smooth sailing, or riding, or driving, or whatever. I would like to point out, though, that driving around downtown Seattle is a clear exception to this. Leaving the estate, which still consists of a small and cozy cottage and some fields, the main road heads south through the heavy forest I've just created. It is a long and sweeping route that mostly follows the course of the old river to nowhere. And this particular run through the forest stirs all sorts of memories of Grimm's fairy tales. Not the original German ones full of death and dismemberment, but the kinder and gentler versions that I heard when I was a kid. Wolves seem to historically play the role of villain in those tales, and I think it was mostly a case of systematic bias and prejudice. I'm pretty sure wolves have much better public relations people working for them nowadays. At the southern end of this stretch of road, there is a crossroad that will allow us to continue eastward to Andover, which is just across the bridge, or westward toward Grantham and Chippenham. Now, zipping across the bridge will put me smack dab in the heart of Andover, or at least it will, once there are actually more than just two buildings in the village. Returning to the crossroad, the branch road heads to the southwest and around the large hill that begins my patch of redwood forest. Now, this first bit of the road is pleasant enough as it runs through and between a birch forest and a bunch of cherry trees before finally plunging into the redwoods. Though eventually, those cherry trees and birch trees will need to be replaced. At one point, it became clear that it would make a lot more sense to build a small tunnel through the hill than to try and build a road hugging the edge of it. The next intersection is incomplete. The missing road will eventually continue to and through Grantham, and then on to Sudchester, and then back around through the whole of Gryphonshire. Now, from this intersection, the road continues north, following the shoreline until it currently ends just north of the estate, but it will eventually run directly to Driffield, and from there it will branch out throughout the Shire. And I do believe that's all I have to share for this episode. Now, in the next episode, I will return to Andover, where I will start adding merchants in the village proper. Now, I have quite a few options to choose from among the vanilla villagers and several more from my mods. However, it's probably time to put some calories into figuring what new villager professions I can add and what they will have to offer, and then figure out which ones I will or will not include in Andover and the other villages as well. So I hope you join me for that. I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Feel free to share them in the comments. Before I go, I also want to remind you that you can experience this world firsthand. In the episode notes, you will find a link to the Gryphon Manor project page on my website. And from there, you can find links to download the CurseForge profile and the latest save game file. Now, I can't guarantee it will work for you, especially if you have a much older computer, but there is a good chance that it will, and if so, you can go walking around and poking your nose in all the nooks and crannies to see firsthand what I've done, and in as much detail as you like. Now, if you do go to all that trouble, I would love to hear your experiences and thoughts on all of it. Just share them in the comments as well. And in the meanwhile, I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and a touch of good fortune. Take care of yourselves out there. Cheers.